All right, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Bob Brakey, head of the IHA Lifestyle Medicine Institute, and I'm so pleased this morning to welcome a very special guest. Back when I started the practice of family medicine, lifestyle medicine in 1985, it was clear there was an emerging leader in the nutrition pillar out of Washington, D.C. We're very pleased to have this morning Dr. Neil Barnard, who is an adjunct professor at the George Washington School of Medicine. Neil has published over 100 studies in peer-reviewed medical journals and done many of those studies himself, including groundbreaking research showing that type 2 diabetes is commonly reversible. In fact, wrote the book on it, his book on reversing diabetes. I commonly refer my patients to. They gain great benefit from it. He's gone on to author more than 20 other books, including The Cheese Trap, and provided a nutrition guide for clinicians, which is provided for all medical students in the country, and fills a real gap. I know after completing med school at University of Michigan and my family medicine residency, there was very little nutrition education. So physicians and medical school are very fortunate to have this guide. And if you haven't seen it, contact Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Indeed, Neil founded that group in 1985, and it's grown to over 150,000 members now. They sponsor the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine in DC, virtual the last couple of years, but prior to that with over 900 attendees from all over the world. So Neil is truly an internationally known clinician in this lifestyle medicine field and a very sought after speaker. So we are so pleased that this morning he's taking time out of his busy schedule to present to us his latest research on using foods to control hormones and enhance health and vitality. Neil, thank you again for joining us. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's great to be with you today. I'd like to talk about something that has gotten many of us really very excited. It brings both our clinical practice and also the practice of sort of what you might think of as kind of nutritional medicine, brings it to a new level. The old idea was you might eat a bad thing. You'd eat a greasy cheeseburger, and so you would gain weight or your cholesterol would go up. But it turns out that virtually everything in your body is controlled in one way or another by hormonal signals. Thyroid hormone comes from your thyroid gland, and it gives your cells energy, or the reproductive function is controlled by testosterone, estrogens, and other hormones. Insulin is the hormone made in the pancreas that controls blood sugar. And all of these hormones are affected in a variety of ways by foods. We weren't taught that in medical school. That science, however, has evolved to quite a sophisticated degree. And if we can use foods to control hormonal conditions, we've got power we never had before, and so do our patients. So let me share this with you. First of all, a few disclosures. I'm on the adjunct faculty at the George Washington University School of Medicine, and I run the Physicians Committee and Barnard Medical Center, but do not get compensated for any of that work. But I do write books and give lectures. Let's start with insulin. My father, when I was growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, my dad had gone through quite a career transition of his own. He grew up in the cattle business, as did all my forebears. And my dad did not particularly like raising cattle, and he left the business. And he decided to go to medical school, and he became the diabetes expert for Fargo, North Dakota, and all of the eastern part of the state. And he'd walk in the door after a day's work, 6 o'clock, 6:15, he'd sit down his medical bag, and I never once heard my father say that anyone with diabetes ever got better. So-and-so is cured, no longer has diabetes. Never heard anything like that. It was always fighting a losing battle. You were trying to slow down the process of complications and try to delay the inevitable premature death in your patients with diabetes. Well, let's shift gears. Let's look a little bit differently. In 2003, the National Institutes of Health gave my research team a grant to try to find a better nutritional approach to type 2 diabetes. And what we were testing was a plant-based diet versus a conventional diet. In a minute, I'll show you the rationale for this. But what was the study? Conventional diet was what you already know about. The person who is overweight needs to cut calories. This is the conventional approach. Cut 500 calories a day off your diet. Keep carbohydrate fairly steady. Avoid the bad fats like trans fats and saturated fat. The plant-based diet was no animal products, vegan diet, minimizing oils, and also favoring low glycemic index foods. Now, if that's a new term for you, white bread will cause your blood sugar to rise fairly steeply, but rye bread less so, and beans even less so. So beans are low glycemic index, white bread is high glycemic index. They both have a lot of carbohydrate, but in the low glycemic index foods, those carbohydrates are released gradually into the bloodstream. So what was the plant-based intervention? No animal products, minimize oils, low glycemic index foods. Okay, to cut to the chase, what we track is A1C. And as you know, we want A1C to be below 7. Our people were not below 7. They were all up around 8 at the beginning. And the red line here is the control group following the portion-controlled conventional diet. And they did well. They had a drop of A1C of about 0.4 absolute percentage points. Pretty good. However, the blue line here is the people following the plant-based diet, the vegan diet. And they had an A1C reduction that was 3 times more profound. It was a drop of just over 1.2 absolute percentage points on average. Let me share with you an individual experience. Vance was one of our research participants who was first to join the trial. And Vance told me about his life. He'd been a policeman here in Washington. Then he worked in a bank. And diabetes was all up and down his family tree. He says, to me, that means I'm going to lose a leg. I'm going to go blind. Vance's father was dead at 30. Now, Vance himself developed type 2 diabetes at 31. He came in to see us late in his later 30s. And he began the plant-based diet. And I will never forget him saying, this is the easiest diet I've ever been on. And I thought, what are you talking about? This is a vegan diet. People think of it as, challenging, like you have to acquire a taste for folk music to go vegan, or maybe you got to wear tie-dye clothes or something. He said, no. His previous diabetes diets said cut calories. So if you normally eat 2,000 calories, the dietitian says, here's your 1,500 calorie menu or 1,300 calories or whatever it is. Get used to it. This is what you're going to eat. And by about Wednesday, you are ready to throttle your dietitian. And they also say count your carbohydrate grams, and that gets really old by about Wednesday. And he said, you don't make me do any of that. You just say, have chili, but instead of meat chili, have bean chili. How hard is that? Yeah, if I go to an Italian place, instead of meat sauce, have the tomato sauce. Anybody can do this. And over the course of a year, he lost 60 pounds. He stopped his diabetes medications. His A1C dropped from 9.5 at baseline, which is not good, to 5.3. And when this happened to Vance, this was about 20 years ago, I got his lab slip and I closed my office door and I paced around my office for about 10 minutes, trying to decide, could I tell Vance that he was cured of diabetes? Because he wasn't on any medicines and his A1C was not even pre-diabetes. It was absolutely normal range. He could go into any clinic in the world, they would not diagnose him with diabetes. And of course, now we see this all the time. You have a person who's clearly got diabetes. They make some pretty big diet changes and their diabetes for all intents and purposes has disappeared. Oh, by the way, Vance asked me to make sure I told you that his erectile dysfunction went away too. We could talk more about that if you like. Other teams have found the same thing. There have been a number of people who have been doing this kind of research. That systematic review back in 2014 showed, as you can see from the forest plot here, all the little black squares are to the left of the center line, meaning A1C improves in all these studies. So it's a very predictable effect. A low-fat plant-based diet without any calorie limit, without any limit on carbohydrates, without telling the patient how much to eat, without making them go to bed hungry, causes a big improvement in their A1C. Okay, how? I want to show you how. And by the way, if you are texting, emailing, talking to anybody else, let me please ask for your full attention for the next 2 minutes, because I want to show you my most important slide. This is the cause of type 2 diabetes. This is a muscle cell. This purple blob in the middle of your screen, that's a muscle cell. And muscle cells are fueled by glucose. Just like your car is fueled by gasoline, your muscle cell works with glucose. That's why marathon runners, are carbo loading before the race because glucose is your fuel. It's a good thing. Problem is it cannot get into the cell. Glucose bounces right off that cell membrane. It won't go inside until you have a hormone called insulin. Insulin is like a key, and it attaches to a receptor on the surface of the muscle cell. Once it does, it signals the certain channels to open up in the cell surface to allow glucose to come through. Okay, so insulin is just a key. It's opening up the membrane. That's all it does. What could ever go wrong? What could go wrong is I live in Fargo, North Dakota. And so this is my dinner. And that's my lunch. And that's my breakfast. And there's a lot of fatty stuff in my diet. And if I add up the fat in these foods, there's a lot of fat in them. They're all high-fat foods. So what? Here's what I eat. Ends up gradually accumulating in muscle cells. Dietary fat builds up in muscle cells, and we call it intramyocellular lipid. The same thing happens in liver cells, hepatocellular lipid. When that occurs, it causes insulin resistance. Fat inside the cell means the insulin will still attach to the receptor, but nothing happens. The glucose is not getting signaled to open up. The cell membrane stays shut. The insulin is not working. The patient has insulin resistance. You know about this. Okay. What if I'm on a diet that has no animal products in it? Well, there isn't any animal fat at all, is there? And what if I keep vegetable oils very low? There's not much of any kind of fat in the diet. And the fat in the cells begins to dissipate. And as that fat dissipates, the intramyocellular lipid is going away. The insulin can work again. The insulin resistance is replaced by insulin sensitivity, and your patient now can take the sugar out of the blood. Blood sugar goes down, the glucose accumulates back in the cell where it's supposed to, where it can provide energy. And their A1C just went down. Okay, cool. Everyone's happy. All right. Let me bring you to Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut. Our good friends Kit Peterson, Jerry Schulman, and their team looked at individuals who were healthy, didn't have diabetes, but they all got a glucose tolerance test where you drink 75 grams of syrup and you get a big sugar load that's going to go into the bloodstream very rapidly, and it does. But for some, they clear that sugar fairly quickly. That's insulin sensitivity. For others, they drink the syrup and the sugar builds up in their blood and it doesn't get into the cells. So it stays high. That's insulin resistant. Now, young, 28 years old, 26 years old, they're skinny. Look at that. They're not overweight at all. They don't have diabetes either. They got nice low A1Cs. Aren't they great? However, let's take a look inside their muscle cells and see what we see. Yep, we can do that. If you ever had an MRI for a twisted ankle or something like that, well, now we can use MR spectroscopy to look inside your muscle cells and quantify your intramyocellular lipid. And I want to show you the results. Every dot here is a person. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the intramyocellular lipid in the insulin-sensitive participants, the control subjects, the healthy ones. And here it is in those who are insulin resistant. Do you see the difference? Every dot is a person, and as you can see, the insulin-resistant subjects had substantially more IMCL, intramyocellular lipid, on average compared to the insulin-sensitive subjects. And let's go a step further. Let's look at their mitochondria. And by the way, if you're seeing a photo strip or something that's blocking your view, you could just drag it out of the way. So if you compare the mitochondrial activity of the healthy control subjects to the insulin-resistant subjects, you see a big difference. What am I saying? I'm saying that some individuals have been eating fatty foods that have built up, fat has built up in the cells. You can measure, you can see it on the scan, and it's interfering with the cellular metabolism. The mitochondria are impaired. They don't have diabetes, and they're not going to get diabetes for another 15 years or so. But the disease process has started. And if you could walk into any high school in Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, anywhere, and take the 16 and 17-year-old kids and stick them in an MR scanner, you would start to see that many of them already have the beginnings of the accumulation of intramyocellular lipid, in addition to narrowed arteries, in addition to high blood pressure. If you glucose tolerance test them, you'll see that some of them are insulin resistant. And in 15 years' time, when they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they will be told, well, I guess this is genetic, it's in your family, right? Let's start you on metformin. And after a year or two, the metformin isn't adequate. And so we'll add another oral medication. And then we'll have a frank talk with them about needles. And they will die 10 to 15 years before their friends who don't have diabetes. And along the way, they'll have complications and they'll be extremely costly to our medical system, and their families will mourn their loss. And no one will have told them what you now know about the cause of diabetes and how we can design a diet to attack that cause and attack it very, very, very rapidly. Let's shift from insulin. Let's talk about estrogens. I was sitting at my desk one day, and the phone rang, and a young woman named Robin called me. And Robin was the daughter of another doctor who I know, and her mother practices in another state. And Robin called her mother and said, the mother said, call Dr. Barnard, he might be able to help you. Robin said, I am being tortured. Here's the picture she painted for me. She had menstrual cramps. Now, a lot of women have cramps, but for about 1 in 10, menstrual pain is sufficient to really interfere with functioning. And Robin had a flight to catch the next day. She said, I can't get out of bed, let alone get on a flight. What can I do? And I said, well, let me give you some painkillers for today and tomorrow so that you can function. But I also suggested something else that I frankly don't think any doctor ever would have suggested for dysmenorrhea or primary menstrual pain. I suggested to her, for the next 4 weeks, would you like to try an experiment with me? She said, I'll try anything. I said, how about this? No animal products for the next month and minimize oils. So I don't want you using oil when you cook. I'll show you how to not do that. Non-stick pan. Get away from really fatty foods like onion rings and potato chips and even salad oils. Let's keep the oils really, really very low and let's see what happens. She called me back a month later and said, Dr. Barnard, I want to tell you something. My period arrived today. I didn't have any pain whatsoever. And she kept up the diet and she found that she was effectively cured. Unless she would deviate from the diet a little bit, then the pain would come back. Okay. I have to confess to you, I had made an educated guess that this would help her. There wasn't really any research basis for it with regard to this, but I want to tell you what I was thinking. But first, because of her success, I called up my friends at Georgetown University's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. I said, I want to do a randomized crossover trial. We brought in then a large group of women, all of whom had menstrual pain. And half of them went on the diet that I just described for Robin. The other half went on a supplement. It was a little capsule, looked like medicine, but it was in fact a placebo. After 2 months, 2 cycles, everybody switched. The diet group began the supplement group began the diet. In a word, it worked. We published the findings in Obstetrics and Gynecology, and the pain was reduced in intensity and also in duration. And beyond that, PMS symptoms got better. Things like water retention and bloating and moodiness all improved. Okay, so let me come back to why I suggested this for Robin. As I say, it was an educated guess, but if you remember your physiology, this will come to you. This is the amount of estrogen in a woman's blood, and I'm going to say estrogens. It's really mostly estradiol here, but there are other estrogens, as you know, estrone and estriol. Okay, at the beginning of a woman's menses, there's very little estrogen in the blood. However, over the next 2 weeks, the amount of estrogen rises to a sharp peak and then it falls. She's ovulating. The ovary is releasing an egg. Okay, so that egg is going to implant somewhere. The uterus is the most optimistic organ in the body. Every month it's convinced, this is the big one. We're going to get pregnant this month for sure. So that egg has to implant in a nice, soft endometrial cushion, assuming it gets fertilized. So the amount of estrogen rises in kind of the second half of the month. And as the estrogen level is rising, the endometrial layer is now thickening up in anticipation of a blessed event. However, at the end of that week, The disappointed uterus discovers we're not pregnant at all. And so the estrogen level falls, that endometrial layer is discarded, and it all starts over again the next month. This whole curve can be adjusted up and down. You can have more estrogen, you can have less estrogen, and it's based on food. Let me show you what I mean. Okay. In the middle of the screen is the uterus. On the sides are the ovaries, and they're connected by the fallopian tubes. The endometrial layer that you see thickens up every month. That's just what you're seeing. And the more estrogen you got, the more it thickens up. And if you got a lot of estrogen on board, that endometrial layer will thicken up a lot. And when it does, as it breaks apart with menstrual flow, it releases prostaglandins that cause terrible pain. You with me? So if there's more estrogen in the blood, you get more endometrial thickening, which causes the release of more prostaglandins, which cause misery. And some of them get into the bloodstream and they go to your brain and make you feel rotten. Okay, so at Tufts University in 1994, researchers brought in 48 women. They were all in their reproductive years, and they were locked into a metabolic ward where they were going to do diets. The diets were 8 to 10 weeks in length. Some cut the fat content, 40% down to like 20%. Other diets increased fiber. And this was a metabolic ward. They could not order out from McDonald's. The diets were isocaloric and weight maintaining. What did they find? If all you do is reduce the fat content of the diet, what happens? Estradiol level coasts downward a little bit. Estrone goes down. Free estradiol goes down a lot, and estrone sulfate as well. That's just from reducing fat. What if I increase fiber? Same thing. The hormones go down. Okay, so when Robin called me up and said, I've got terrible menstrual pain, I found myself thinking, wait a minute. You got too much estrogen that's causing the endometrial layer to give you prostaglandins that are making you miserable. If I reduce the fat and boost the fiber, I'm going to tone down your estrogens. So next month you're going to feel better. And what better way to do that than get rid of all the animal fat and all the vegetable oil to the extent I can and really boost the fiber. So vegan diet is 100% plants. Everything you eat has fiber. And there's no animal fat and very little of any other kind of oil. So it's the most effective way to do this. And that's what I was guessing. I have to tell you, I was guessing. And it did work. It worked wonderfully. And so now we've published the results, and lots of women use this to help themselves. And by the way, if you have a patient with primary dysmenorrhea or endometriosis, run, do not walk to this kind of dietary prescription. There is no contraindication to it. And for many women, they'll find they feel a lot better. And by the way, they have to really do it. You can't do this just on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. You have to do it all the way. Estrogens are wily characters, and they will cause mischief if you don't really get the diet in order. Okay, let me show you how fiber works. Fiber helps the liver to remove excess estrogens. Yeah, so the estrogens are coursing through the blood. The fiber removes them, sends them through the biliary tree into the intestinal tract. And if there is fiber in the intestine, it carries those estrogens out through with the waste, and you're literally flushing them down the toilet. But if you live in America and your lunch is salmon or Velveeta or a steak or a pork chop or yogurt, these are not plants and they don't have fiber. And your diet is pretty low in fiber overall. And without adequate fiber in your digestive tract, the estrogens don't stay there anymore. They go back into circulation. Yep, they go right through the intestinal wall, back into your bloodstream. And this is enterohepatic circulation of estrogen. And the way to interrupt that is to go on a plant-based diet. There's now so much fiber in there that the estrogens are captured and flushed away. So let me make sure everyone's paying attention. Spam, fiber or no fiber? No fiber, that's right. It goes in the trash. Okay, so how about KFC? Fiber or no fiber? Well, there is fiber if you eat the carton, but apart from that, no dice. We're going to toss that too. Now, there are some foods that started out as plants, but through the miracles of processing, all their fiber was removed, and we can dump them too. You get the idea. You need fiber. There's one other thing just to be aware of. it's not just fat content to the diet and fiber content to the diet. Your fat cells, anybody's fat cells, convert testosterone to estrogens. They convert androgens to estrogens. And so if a guy has breast enhancement, that's not because he ate tofu or something like that, which is what he read in Men's Health. That's not it at all. Tofu doesn't do that. Soy does not do that. What happened was the burgers and pizza he's been eating that made him gain more body fat. Body fat is an estrogen factory, and that will cause testosterone to diminish and estradiol to increase. Okay. Right. Let me shift gears. We've talked about insulin. We've talked about estrogen. What about when estrogen levels fall dramatically? What happens then? What can happen then is vasodilation. Here's what I mean. A woman's 52. She's sitting in the board meeting, and she's trying to get through the meeting agenda. And all of a sudden, she is drenched with sweat because vasodilation happened in her skin. Estrogen shifts caused the blood vessels to open up, and she feels it's 150 degrees, and the people around the room see that she's turned beet red and she's embarrassed, and hot flashes are hitting her 4 to 5 times a day. And it's happening at night too. And that means she never gets a good night's sleep. Well, what can you do about that? Well, researchers in Canada interviewed women in Japan, more than 1,000 women in Japan, and they discovered that back in the 1980s, women had hot flashes quite rarely. And when they did, they were mild, and they didn't even have a word for them. It wasn't a big thing. The diet was mostly rice-based at that time, and there was some tofu and some soy products, but there wasn't a lot of meat in the diet. And the same thing was true in China. Researchers interviewed Chinese women and found that hot flashes were pretty uncommon there too. Less than 15% of women had them. Okay, what's this about? Okay, well, soybeans contain isoflavones. Isoflavones are in tofu, and they're in tempeh, and they're in edamame, and so forth. And isoflavones are sort of a modest medicine against hot flashes. They're famous because they reduce breast cancer risk, but they also work as medicine against hot flashes. How do we know that? We know that because people have studied them. And this is a 2016 systematic review that looked first at dietary soy. And I don't know if you can see this, in this little forest plot, if on the left-hand side of the center line there, and again, if there's something obscuring it, you can just drag that picture out of the way. If the little dot is to the left of the line, that means that the soy products help reduce symptoms. And if it's on the right, that means it didn't. And you can't really make much out of it. It's not very effective, really, is it? But then researchers looked at supplements and soy extracts. And there you see a little bit more of a signal. It's still modest, but the point is that Japanese women don't have much hot flashes. Maybe part of the reason is they have soy products in their diet. Okay, maybe. But there's more to it. What happened in Japan? McDonald's arrived in Japan. That's what happened. And suddenly the rice-based diet gives way to a burger diet and pizza and all these kinds of things. And by the early 2000s, hot flashes were in more than 40% of women, and breast cancer rates doubled. Okay, what happened? It's not that soy dropped. The black line here is soy intake from the 60s to 2001. And it's kind of the same. I mean, Japanese women still like tofu, but the percentage of protein that is soy protein has dropped. In other words, something else came in and kind of took a lot of space in the diet. And what is that? That fish greatly increased. There was fish in the diet before, but now there's about twice as much. Meat increased, and dairy, which was not part of the diet really at all, has come in a big way, and squeezing out rice, grains, potatoes. A more plant-based diet became a more animal-based diet. Okay, so it's something about soy, but also something about the overall diet. And to confirm that, let's go to Mexico. Go to Cancun, get in your Hertz rental car, drive 2 hours west, and you will be in Valladolid. And right next to it is another town called Chichimilá. And researchers interviewed Mayan women and found that they really didn't have hot flashes at all. None of the women reported symptoms of hot flashes or any big deal in the menopausal transition. What do they eat? Soybeans? Rice? I don't think so. rice is not their grain is corn. And soybeans are not their favorite legume, they eat black beans. But they eat lots of vegetables too. This one is la chaya. And traditionally, before the arrival of Pizza Hut, there was a huge use of black beans, corn tortillas, and vegetables, and there still is to a great degree. So that made researchers think soy is maybe one thing, but it's also just a plant-based diet in general seems to help. So the Women's Health Initiative said, let's put some of this to the test. Let's bring in a huge group of women. They're all reporting their hot flashes. They're not on any hormones, and let's change their diets to reduce the fat and increase the fruits and vegetables and so forth. What happened? The odds of becoming free of hot flashes at 1 year of study increased. If you could lose 10% of your body weight with this healthy diet, you were 23% more likely to be hot flash free. What if you didn't lose any weight? Well, if you at least just followed the diet, you were now 10%, 14% higher risk of being hot flash free. So the conclusion of the Women's Health Initiative, this part of the study, was the dietary intervention itself seems to work over and above the effect of a diet change. All right, so let's go back. What are we talking about? Hot flashes seem to be affected by soy intake. Soy can help. An overall plant-based diet can help. Weight loss maybe can help. Okay, so researchers in Illinois said then vegans ought to do better, and indeed they do. Whether it's the perimenopausal period or postmenopausal period, vegans seem to have a little bit of an edge compared to omnivores. Okay, so the plot thickens. Researchers have found one more thing that seems to matter, and that's the gut microbiome. The microbiome will alter those isoflavones. Here's what I mean. You eat some soy products, daidzein gets in your digestive tract, your gut bacteria converted to equal. And equal is more effective than daidzein against hot flashes, but you don't make equal. If you're a Western adult, chances are you don't have the right gut bacteria. If you're Asian, yeah, you might. In Australia, they found that non-vegetarians tended not to produce it. Vegetarians did. And in the US, same story. What do I mean? I mean that a plant-based diet supports the growth of healthy gut bacteria that can produce equal from daidzein. If you're on a meaty diet, your gut bacteria aren't healthy, and they don't do that as a generalization. Okay, so the hypothesis is if I want to treat hot flashes, let's have soybeans. That'll provide isoflavones. Let's avoid animal products and added oils. That'll help weight loss. That'll help isoflavone conversion. So let me skip this really quickly. I just want to cut to the chase. Our research team did a study of diet versus a control, and the diet was just what we described. No animal products, minimizing oils, and a half a cup of soybeans every day. And what we found, the women ate fruits and grains and legumes and vegetables. They had vitamin B12 prescribed, which is always important. And we recorded their hot flashes on an app called MyLuna, which is really handy. It's much better than keeping a paper and pencil record. Everyone got a self-calibrating Renfo scale, so they knew how much they weighed, and everyone got an Instant Pot to cook their soybeans. The participants were in their mid-50s, mostly white, but not entirely, a little bit overweight, and a few years out of menopause. To cut to the chase here, the average woman in the control group gained a little bit of weight. The average woman in the diet group lost almost 8 pounds. When we looked at their hot flashes, just any hot flashes, they dropped from, in the intervention group, from about 6 a day to about 1 a day. That's just hot flashes of any severity. But if you look at the hot flashes that were moderate to severe, they dropped from about 5 a day to less than 1 per day, which the women really appreciated. And if you looked at who was free of hot flashes, well, at the beginning of the study, everybody had hot flashes, but by 12 weeks, 59% of the women didn't have any moderate to severe hot flashes at all. And in the control group, we didn't see that change. Okay, so we also looked at quality of life, whether it's vasomotor symptoms or psychosocial symptoms or physical symptoms or sexual symptoms. All of these improved in the diet group more than the control. Now, by this point, you might be thinking, wait a minute, if I look at that control group, they got better too. They didn't get a lot better, but they got a little better. Why? And the short answer is I don't know why. But I have some hunches. And one guess is that menopausal symptoms do improve gradually over time. Also, we did the study starting in September last year, and we finished it in December, and it's getting cooler. But the other thing was the women joined a study to test a vegan diet. Some of them were put in the control group, but they wanted to be in the vegan group, and they got an Instant Pot given to them and a scale, so every day they knew how much they weighed. It's possible that some of them started to make a few diet explorations on their own. Who knows? Okay, let me just finish up with a couple of last minute things. When you encourage your patients with hot flashes to try this approach, they'll say, soybeans, I read on the internet that those cause cancer, don't they? And the answer is no, they don't cause cancer at all. They have exactly the opposite effect. In a 2008 meta-analysis of 8 prior studies, women consuming the most soy had a 29% reduction in breast cancer risk. And women previously diagnosed with breast cancer, if they consume a lot of soy, have a reduction in mortality. So the soy causes cancer myths, for some reason, just won't die. But no, soybeans do not cause cancer, and they do not, and they don't increase cancer mortality. And the old idea was, well, they attach to the estrogen receptor, don't they? Well, you've got 2 different kinds of estrogen receptors. Estrogen receptor alpha, that's the gas pedal, but the isoflavones attach to estrogen receptor beta. Think of that as the brake. So the soy isoflavones, they're not driving cancer the way estradiol would. All right. So the patient says, I'm in, but how am I going to go vegan? I don't know how to do this. My family will divorce me if they find out that I'm suddenly going vegan. Here's how we do it at the Barnard Medical Center, and I've never seen anyone unable to do it. You ask the patient to take a week and just check out the possibilities. They take a piece of paper, and you say, come back here in a week, and come back with this paper filled in with anything you can think of that happens to be plant-based that you would actually like to eat. And I want you to try these foods during this week and just see what you like. They don't have to change their diet. They're just experimenting and coming up with a list. And they pretty soon got a list. They've got oatmeal with cinnamon and raisins, or pancakes without butter, or scrambled tofu. They tried it. They ended up liking it. Or they'd had a veggie burger or veggie fajitas or cheeseless pizza, and they put that on the list. And they went to an Italian restaurant and had spaghetti marinara. And they thought, I can do that. Or they went to a Latin American restaurant and had veggie fajitas, and they thought, that's pretty good too. Or the Chinese rice and vegetables and tofu. Or Japanese, not fish sushi, but the cucumber roll or the edamame or whatever. That's all pretty good. And Taco Bell is not the pinnacle of culinary art, but they've got some vegan options too. So the patient comes back with a pretty robust list. And now you say the next step, just eat these foods. For the next 3 weeks, go all vegan, use your list, and come back and tell me how it happens. Keep in touch with them every week, because they'll hit bumps in the road, like a wedding reception that they're not sure how to do it vegan, but they're good answers to all these things. After 3 weeks, they will be physically healthier, and their tastes will start to embrace healthier things. And they haven't had a chicken wing in 3 weeks. And they discover they don't care about it anymore. Last thing, your patient will say, I never cooked soybeans. How the heck do you do that? Here's how you do it. Edamame is baby soybeans. Those are juvenile soybeans. They're a delicious appetizer, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is mature soybeans. The mature soybeans have more isoflavones than the edamame does. You go online, you buy Laura brand non-GMO soybeans, or any of the other brands, you'll see them all there, and you'll find them organic and so forth. They ship to you. Stick them in your Instant Pot, pressure cook them for 40 minutes, or throw them in any pot. Just soak them overnight and boil them for a good hour or so. Very simple. That's easy. They come out like pine nuts. Throw them on a salad, have a half a cup every day. For extra credit, you can roast them. And that's a really cool thing to do, because now you've got something that can sit in your desk drawer or in your luggage when you travel. So pressure cook them in your Instant Pot, spread them on a parchment-coated baking sheet. Stick them in the oven, 350 for an hour. They come out nice and dry. If they're not dry, cook them a little longer, and then salt them up or put some garlic powder, whatever the heck. If they are nice and dry, put them in some Tupperware, and they travel well, and they're a nice snack. They're just like dry roasted peanuts. Okay. Okay, if we're feeling a little lazy, you can just go onto Amazon and they will sell you pre-roasted organic or non-GMO soybeans. Okay, they're called toasteds. Now, if you want, say, I want to do this with soy yogurt or soy milk instead of whole soybeans, you can, but to get the isoflavone intake that you could get from a half a cup of whole soybeans, you would need 2 quarts of soy milk. So that's the reason that we use the whole soybeans. They're much more concentrated in them. We got lots of resources for you. Please do check these out at the Physicians Committee. Go to pcrm.org/events. You will see our Fight Diabetes with Food series. It is free, doesn't cost anybody anything. We do this on a recurrent basis. Please refer your patients to it, costs nothing. Spanish speakers, we have many events for Spanish speakers, including a free intervention program, September 25th. Hot Flashes with Food, also totally free. The series recurs, starts October 12th, doesn't cost anybody anything. ICNM, our conference that Bob was kindly mentioning, will be next August, and we'd love to see you there. Our nutrition guide for clinicians that Bob also kindly mentioned is also virtual. And let me encourage you to just go to Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, download it for free. It's continuously updated. This is my book, Your Body in Balance. It describes all the things that we talked about today. And let me stop and say a big thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. Let me see if I can manage to unshare my screen.
Neil, thank you so much. Your knowledge and wisdom in this topic area is excellent. And in addition, you've done the research. You were the one that brought it forth. Thank you so much for presenting this morning. We do have one question in the chat from Yara. She says, I think our patients know that they shouldn't eat white bread, but there's so many other kinds, from oat bread to multigrain to other. Do you have a preferred kind of bread that you recommend for patients?
Yeah, and by the way, I didn't necessarily mean to say that white bread is poison. Because of the kind of noxious influence of the ketogenic movement, they suggest that if you have some kind of grain that it really hurts you. In our diabetes studies, because the patients are very insulin resistant, we're trying to not challenge them with too much glucose at a time. And so for that person, they'll want to have a more low GI bread. And if you go from white to rye to pumpernickel, the GI will gradually descend. If you go from white bread to whole grain wheat bread, as opposed to rye bread, its glycemic index still remains rather high. It's something about the wheat grain that is very generous with its glucose. It just explodes into your bloodstream pretty quickly. So those are some choices for you.
Yeah, right. Sounds good. Thank you. Alberto, take it away.
Hello, Dr. Barnard. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I love your book and I've loved your lectures, and it's nice to meet you even virtually.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you.
I'm a lifestyle physician here in Brighton, Michigan, and literally yesterday I saw a gentleman, a 33-year-old gentleman that I've been taking care of since he was a teenager, morbidly obese, having ED, having fatigue, the works. You've heard this story 1,000 times. His biggest concern, though, is that he's developing, quote unquote, man boobs. He's got significant gynecomastia and not a drinker. So he told me that immediately, I'm not drinking any alcohol. And I said, well, it's part of your diet. I had a discussion with him about that. And he had read somewhere else about, increasing protein, cutting down carbs. And I'm trying to have this discussion with him, but we get so much pressure from the media and from all this information that's in like men's magazines and quote unquote health magazines. How do you address this kind of stuff when people just argue with you about it? How do you present information to them?
Oh, I feel your pain. We not only live in a world that has had increasingly available unhealthy foods. When we were little, there wasn't a convenience store on every corner, and there weren't fast food chains everywhere. Well, they are there now, and people have the money to go there, and it's all over the TV. And just as prevalent as unhealthy foods are unhealthy ideas, and they're propagated with very little balance. And unfortunately, the whole idea is that he gained weight from eating potatoes or something like that. Or so you hear carbs is the big problem, and protein is somehow the solution. And you could do a clinical trial where you up his protein intake, and he's not going to lose any weight that way. So I don't know what the answer is, except we first of all have to present information, because the person has no motivation for adopting a diet change if they don't have at least a rationale for it. If there's someone else in his life, in our clinic, we always bring in the patient and then their reluctant spouse or their parents or their kids or somebody else, particularly people that they eat with, partly because those people will interfere with the diet or they'll support the diet. You want to bring them in. And let's say it's diabetes. I will take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and draw my oval and show them intramyocellular lipid, and I'll give them that paper. It doesn't take long, by the way. Clinicians don't have a lot of time for this, but it only takes maybe 2 minutes for me to give that talk. But then I refer them to a dietitian who will take 45 minutes and sit down with them and talk about what the diet will be. Now, man boobs are in the locker room, they will blame soy products. They'll say, I read in Men's Health that it's got estrogen and that's what did it. But go to any beach on an August day and you walk up to a guy who takes off his t-shirt and he's got a little bit of breast enhancement, go right up to him and say, how much tofu did you eat this week? I guarantee you that guy has not been eating tofu at all. What happened, and you said your patient was obese. He's got a huge layer of fat cells making estrogens. And that a little bit of gynecomastia can be normal. A lot of guys have just a hair of it, subclinical. But if he's got substantial, that just is entirely from his body fat. And so his testosterone is turning into estrogen. So bottom line, I would encourage him over a short period of time to try the diet that we've described. No animal products, keep it low fat. He's got to have a structure where you meet with him every week or something like, not you, but somebody's got to meet with him, keep him on track. That's why we offer these classes, so that people can meet by Zoom. And then they get the support they need and eventually they get there.
Great, thanks. Great answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good luck. He's lucky to have you looking out for him.
Yeah,
all right, Neil, the question from Mira, she says, thank you for an excellent presentation. Can you comment on animal proteins' impact on cellular function? You primarily focused on animal fats and the lack of fiber in animal foods. And so commonly people just say, don't worry, I just eat lean meats.
Yeah, it's a bit of a misnomer. And if you take, say, chicken and throw away all the dark meat and you're left with just the white meat and you remove the skin and you cook it with a method that uses no added fat and then send the product to the laboratory, they'll tell you it's still about 23% fat as a percentage of its calories. The muscle tissue is a mixture of protein and lipid. And if you take Chinook salmon, oh, that's the good one, right? Send it to a lab, 50% fat, 52% fat. And so, no, these foods are sponges filled with grease. And so if you're eating mammalian tissue, that's what you're going to get. And it never has any fiber in it because it's not from a plant.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Rhonda says, Dr. Barnard, are there any deficiencies to monitor for patients on a vegan diet, like vitamin deficiencies, et cetera?
Well, your patients come in on a really deficient diet, but before it's important to understand that an animal-based diet is a terrible diet. Not only is it overloaded with saturated fat, but it's deficient in fiber. It's deficient in complex carbohydrates. Meat products don't have any vitamin C in them. They don't have the isoflavones. There's a lot of micronutrients that your patients are missing, which is why they're not very healthy. But you're right. When you go to a plant-based diet, although it is abundant in vitamins, much more so than the meat-based diet, because you've got vegetables and fruits and grains and beans, the vitamins are abundant, the complex carbohydrates are abundant, and so is the fiber. You do need vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is made by bacteria, not plants or animals. And so that's maybe a longer explanation might be needed as to why, but the point is you need vitamin B12, and I would encourage you to just get a B12 supplement, whatever the smallest doses that you can find at the store. Or if you get a multiple vitamin, it's got B12 in it, that's fine too.
You're like, he asked you.
Beyond that, some people will want vitamin D, regardless of diet, because vitamin D's natural source is sunlight on the skin, and in January in Detroit, you're not getting sunlight on your skin. So some people will use vitamin D about 2,000 IUs a day, and that's really about it.
All right, thank you. Next is, thank you, Dr. Barnard, for sharing your knowledge and passion today. Can you please comment on estradiol? Oh, on the estradiol and how this relates to the microbiome. Melissa, do you want to ask this? Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Barnard. I'm one of the lifestyle medicine physicians at IHA as well. And so there's this concept of the estrobolome that I've been reading about that's kind of tied into the gut microbiome. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, there are people who talk about, and we were just talking about this yesterday, about the ability of the microbiome to alter substrates and to produce hormonally active compounds. And there may be science to that, but I am not terribly knowledgeable about that. And I feel like I'm a passenger watching that research sort of unfold. And I mentioned a part of this in my talk, which is equol production. Equol is something it's not in the soybean, it's not in anything you're eating, and it's made by your gut bacteria, but it's only made by certain gut bacteria. And for the longest time, people were thinking, why do women in Tokyo make equol? And so they would try these goofy experiments. They'd take a woman in Omaha and they'd feed her lots of soybeans and tofu, but she wouldn't make equol. And they thought, it's got to be genetic. It's not genetic. You take the woman in Omaha and suddenly put her on a really high fiber, low fat diet that nourishes the growth of a healthy microbiome. Then she can take the soy isoflavones and convert them into equol. The whole idea is that a high fiber plant-based soil, if you will, in your digestive tract allows the growth of a healthy gut microbiome. That's what we think is happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great question.
Yeah. Rich, do you want to unmute and just ask your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Barnard, I'm interested in your perspective on the visit profile to help patients with these types of changes. How many visits with a physician or nutrition specialist, behavioral health specialist to help patients make and sustain this kind of change?
Okay, a wonderful question. I'm a big believer in a team approach, and I honestly don't know how you can treat things like diabetes or obesity without it. Our doctors, the doctors who work here all came in to me and they said, finally, I'm going to have time to really sit and talk with my patients. And I say, forget it, dream on. That's not your job. Your job is to interpret their A1C and tell them they've got type 2 diabetes. That's all I need you to do. You don't have to spend a lot more time with your patient than you did before, because I've got dietitians working right next door to you. So the way our team works is the doctor recognizes the patient's condition and monitors it and gives the patient a little bit of validation, such as, here, set your stopwatch. You need to quit smoking. Okay, how long was that? That was like 3 seconds. Okay, the doctor needs to do that. The doctor also needs to say, you have type 2 diabetes. This is caused by fat buildup in your cells. I know this is a new concept to you, but we're going to give you a diet that is going to help you get the fat out of your cells. Okay, that was 12 seconds. Okay, so the doctor does that. And then the doctor introduces the patient to the dietitian. And the dietitian then sets out kind of a plan. That needs to be done once, really just once. And then sometimes with a remedial thing if the patient gets stuck. But the big thing is you have to have something for the patient to come back on a weekly basis to either a discussion group. And we do these Monday nights. They're free. The patients just come in. And then I have one of my clinicians talk to them. And what we're always looking for is a little group process so that they enjoy being together and a chance to talk about things that are getting in their way. Invariably, it's we're going on a family vacation to South Carolina. What will I eat? Or it's my birthday next week. What can I do? Or we like to go to restaurants. What is there to eat? It's a limited number of issues and the answers are really simple. But if it's new for the patient, they need that social support. So in the pandemic, you can't do this. You can't get together. That's why we do these Zoom sessions. And so at pcrm.org/events, we have Zoom sessions for people in the US, for people in India, and they just get together and they do this kind of talk and it's just life-changing for them. So the visit model, one doctor visit, and you monitor them however you need to medically. One really good solid 45-minute RD visit, registered dietitian visit, plus if the patient, say, isn't losing weight or whatever, have a remedial visit where you're just looking for the guacamole fest in their diet record. And then have some kind of weekly support, which could be run by a health coach or by your clinic. Our clinicians just do them themselves or something like that. Have it every week, and that's all you need to change human behavior.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. Neil, in your book, you mentioned a patient with infertility who ends up reversing that. Do you find that as commonly a hormone-related condition too that can be helped with lifestyle intervention?
Very frequently. And the first issue is what's the cause of the infertility? There were actually two women that I described in this. One was a woman, these are real people. One was Catherine Lawrence, who was an Air Force aerospace engineer, who had terrible endometriosis and was actually scheduled for a hysterectomy. And the hysterectomy couldn't be done for 6 weeks while the surgeon was doing some other things. And when in the intervening time, the patient was guided by a nutritional counselor to do basically our diet. And which, of course, what does it do? It brings estrogen levels down. The endometrial cells are no longer fueled by the estrogen. Her endometriosis gets dramatically better. So she ended up not needing her hysterectomy at all. And although she was told by her doctor that she would be infertile as a result, she still has her uterus and she has 3 kids now as a result. There's another case of a young woman named Allison. Her name's Allison. She's a real person, Allison Tierney. She lives outside Milwaukee. Had terrible PCOS. And PCOS is a genetic condition, really, of just a little extra androgen. But it leads to insulin resistance. Okay, so you start thinking, all right, vegan diet, let me see if I can knock out that insulin resistance. And I think it was about the first month that she started this diet, she finally ovulated and conceived, and she's got a beautiful baby now. And so don't get me wrong. I mean, infertility can be a puzzle, a diagnostic puzzle, but a healthy diet can help with many of the issues, including those for the male. Dairy products contain estrogens because cows are milked into pregnancy and they're impregnated annually. And those traces of estrogen, small though they are enough to reduce sperm counts in men and reduce interfere with sperm morphology and motility.
Great, thank you. Jennifer asks, do you have a specific B12 recommendation for how much to take daily or weekly?
Oh, great question. The RDA is 2.4 micrograms per day. And you will run to the store and discover that they don't have any pills that are 2.4 micrograms. In the multiple vitamins, they're pretty small, and they're appropriate. But the smallest, like B12 pill that you find in the store is probably 500 or 10,000. So just take the smallest one you can find. Online, you'll see maybe 100 or 200, fine. Up to 500, that's fine. If it's bigger than that, take it every other day or break it in 2. There is no reason to be overdosing on vitamin B12.
Yes, thank you. We are coming up to our end time here. Anybody else with a question or want to unmute yourself? Well, Dr. Barnard, thank you so much for a very enlightening and energetic presentation. We appreciate your passion, your contribution in the field here to the understanding of hormone balance and overall health, vitality, and longevity. Any final words for us as far as summary or next steps?
I guess I just want to, first of all, thank all the people who have helped with all of this. I mentioned some real human beings, and along the way, the Robin and Catherine and Allison, these are all people, and they taught me a lot. And so when I wrote Your Body in Balance, it was because of them and all the other women and men who have yet to hear that information. So I hope people will share that information. I also want to thank Lindsay Nixon, who did all the recipes, because I'm an idiot in the kitchen and she's a genius. But finally, most importantly, I want to thank all of you, because you've got a tough job that has not been made any easier by the pandemic, let me say. But your patients are very lucky to have you as clinicians, and you're sharing with them not only everything that medicine has to offer, but also the power that they can take advantage of in their own lives. And you're unleashing that for them. So thanks for doing that.
Yes. And if people want to learn more about Pcrm or find your book, where do they go?
Well, the book is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and if there's a little bookstore that's surviving in your neighborhood, he might have it too, and hope people will remember those people. But our website is pcrm.org, and you'll see lots of information there, lots of recipes and lots of events that people can join.
All right. Yeah, I use your materials a lot with patients. Thank you so much for providing those as well. Again, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. And we will see you back again sometime.
Oh, Bob, I forgot to tell you one thing. We've got
Yes.
a brand new initiative. I know it's 8 o'clock. Go to foodinstructions.org. It's a page that you can actually guide your patients to. It's got little self-guided videos that patients are now using. It's brand new. Have a look at it and give it a try. Foodinstructions.org.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll check it out.
All right.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Bob.
Barnard. Enjoyed the autumn time there in DC, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.